Hello everyone, my name is Michael Belchitis, and welcome to my course, Sculpt the Human Male Torso in Zbrush. I am a lead modeling and sculpting instructor. In this course, we're going to model and sculpt a human male torso. The topics I will be covering will be anatomy of the human torso, identify bony landmarks of the human skeleton, understanding how the muscles attach, blocking the base mesh using Z-spheres, and sculpting using ZBrush brushes to create a realistic polished 3D sculpt. By the end of this course, you'll be able to sculpt any male torso from start to finish, an understanding of the human anatomy of the male torso, an understanding of using low resolution to help you sculpt easier, tips and techniques for making a more realistic male torso. Before beginning this course, you should have an understanding of ZBrush interface and ZBrush brushes. So let's get started. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about the anatomy of our torso, and I'm going to talk about some landmarks, some bony landmarks that will help us navigate around sculpting our male torso. So the first thing that I want to talk about when discussing the anatomy of the male torso is the clavicle or the collarbone. So what I have done, as you can see here, is I have a sort of a reference for you, and I left in all of the brush strokes in the model to show you where generally you want to sculpt. These are going to be the muscle fibers that go in the direction of where the muscles want to connect to in either the one side of the bone, and for an example, say this pectoral muscle connects to the sternum, and then it wraps over to the upper arm underneath the shoulder. So you're going to see this sort of stroke pattern and where the muscle fibers go along. And you can see this from the back as well. Now I'm going to concentrate mainly on the torso, but I do have the deltoids, the shoulder muscles, also in view as well. And we'll touch and talk about them as well. But we're not going to talk about the arms, legs, or the head, just the torso of the male body. So, as I said, the best place to start, I think, is the clavicle. And the reason why I start here with the clavicle is the fact that you can see this bony landmark, and it's right here above the pectoral muscles and right below the neck muscles that you have right here. So if I go to, say, the clay buildup, you can see that we have our neck muscles. If I draw these out a little bit more, right underneath, if you have a little circle here that you can make with your brush to bring out this little bump. Now, obviously, I've accentuated a lot of this model, and this hasn't been smoothed out or polished out at all. It's just to show you some the very most important parts in terms of helping you understand how the muscular anatomy works on the male human body, or the torso, I should say. So the clavicle runs from the top of your pectoral muscles, your chest muscles, all the way over and wraps around to this little bump here on your shoulder. And you can actually see that on most people. In most photographs, you can see this little bump that sticks out. Now, this is a bone that is very close to the surface of the skin. And so we can use this as sort of a guiding point for a lot of the muscles and a lot of the anatomy that happens around it. such as the pectoral, the deltoid, the neck muscles, and the trapezius muscles that wrap around over here. So let's talk about a little bit about the anatomy. Now the names of the muscles aren't too important, but I do want you to realize what they are, and if you need to look at some more references, make sure you do some more research on these. But the names aren't important, just so you understand what they are on the human body and their shape and where their connection points are. And I'm also going to talk about the heads of the muscle. Now, so you have a muscle, but you also will have a head of a muscle, and that's sort of a strand that sort of splits a little bit. And for an example, we have a pectoral muscle that connects from the clavicle to the upper part of your arm underneath your shoulder. That runs right here. Now that's the upper head, usually called the upper head of the pectoral muscle. But you also have these muscles that run along here, this pectoral muscle from the sternum, that connects from the sternum to the upper arm. And then we have the head of the muscle that comes down on the bottom and now connect to the upper arm as well. Now you sort of have one in right underneath. It goes underneath the lower portion of your, or I should say the middle portion of your pectoral muscle. It's really hard to see on most people, only if you have a well-developed bodybuilder with a low body fat percentage, that you could see this lower muscle. It wraps right around here underneath this middle muscle here. So sometimes you can see in some developed bodybuilders a sort of a line here, and then the upper portion of the pectoral muscle. So that's the pecs, the pectoral muscles. We also have the deltoids. The deltoids have 3 heads to its muscle. And if I rotate around a little bit, so you can see this a little bit more, what you'll have is your front deltoid, shoulder muscle. You'll have the side or medial, and then you'll have the rear or posterius. So we have anterior, medial, and posterior heads to the deltoid muscle. And you can kind of see that a little bit in my Sculpt here. And if I go to the Damien standard brush, I can carve this out a little bit more, so it's a little bit more visible. And that's why I kind of wanted to start here in Zbrush and show you these anatomical muscular system, because in a drawing you can't really rotate around, you can't really emphasize these muscles. And so that's why I didn't use any diagrams. We're going to go right into Zbrush, and I think this is the best way to show you how these muscles and where they connect to by using this diagram, or the sculpt that I made here. And you can see it run in the back. This deltoid runs underneath the trapezius. So let's talk about the trapezius muscle. Now the trapezius muscle, also known as the traps, they'll run from the top of the head. If we had the head here, we're just going to talk about the torso, but it actually runs to the top of the head and then runs down all the way on this side. You can see how it runs. And let me go back to my clay buildup. I dug in a little bit too much here, but you can see where the spinal column is. I wanted to, you can see how I add an emphasis to this sculpt by really kind of digging in some areas just to accentuate these muscles, give it some a separation so we can talk about it a little bit more. But you can see how this large mass of muscle goes all the way to a little bit beyond the middle of the back. It runs all the way up to the neck, the top of the head, and it also runs around to the front of the neck and connects to the clavicle here. So that's why this clavicle is a very important part to our sculpting process, I think. Once you get this down, this part down, and we're going to go into a lot more detail as we're sculpting, but I just want to give you an overview of this part of the clavicle and its bony parts to help you understand how to start sculpting, some of the traps and the deltoids and the parts of the upper body. Now, we're in the back here, and we have some muscles here that run along right up in top here, and then we have like this little bit of a gap here. Now, we have about 3 muscles that run along here. And you also have a rhomboid that's very difficult to see. That's kind of underneath the trap muscles. And that will give you a bit of a bump around here. And that's kind of underneath the trapezius muscles. And then you have muscles here, here, and here. And then you have this sort of like a little bit of a gap here where there isn't any muscle. It's just sort of like some fatty tissue. And then we have along here is the latissimus dorsi, also known as the lats. And they're sort of like big wings that come around and they wrap under and connect right at the upper arm. It's a very thick muscle that wraps around. And I think it's very important to understand that this muscle starts from underneath the traps and then connects all the way under and wraps around and twists around into the upper arm. Very similar to the pectoral muscles, they all kind of connect and twist under. It's sort of a twisting effect that connects to the upper arm. And in here would be a little bit of the tricep muscles that we're not going to talk about in this course, but that's what this would be. And then you would have the bicep. This is the connection, the very beginning connection of the bicep muscle. Kind of right around here. So let me turn around here. So you have the latissimus dorsi. Now around here you have the obliques. The obliques run a little bit in the back here, and you have spinal erectors right along here on your lower back. And that connects to the spinal column. And then you have the obliques that wrap around. You can see a little bit from the rear, and they connect all the way over to your hip bone. And this little hip bone, and you have this little bony marker here that kind of sticks out from your pelvis. Now these obliques will connect all the way over, and they wrap around all the way up. This is all the oblique muscles right here, and it kind of creates this sort of an S shape, if you will. Kind of wraps around a little bit. And it wraps all the way up here, and you can see these little connections here that connect and make sort of like, they're sort of like little fingers that connect right up over here where the serratus muscle is. So let me go to my Damien standard brush, and let me bring the draw size down a little bit. And this might be a little bit difficult to make out, so I'm gonna spend a little bit of time just carving these a little bit. So you can see these are what I'm carving out here, these lines here are the obliques. And then right as these connect, sort of like interlocking fingers, right here are the serratus muscles. They'll be underneath the latissimus dorsi. So these serratus muscles, usually see about 3 or 4 little fingers interconnecting with the obliques. And these obliques will come along right around here, and this will bring us to the abdominal muscles. The abdominal muscles are right above the rib cage. So let me go back to my clay buildup, and you can see a little bit of the rib cage as it comes over and around here. So this top portion of the abdominal muscle will cover that upper portion or the center portion of the rib cage. And then you have the sternum right here. So the abdominal muscles are kind of separated. You'll hear the 6-pack. Well, you actually will have sort of an 8-pack in a very low body fat percentage. A male with low body fat percentage that you'll see with bodybuilders and mixed martial artists and high-level athletes. You'll see this sort of lower portion here. So we have the 1, 2, 3, and then this one long band here. And you might see sort of a, maybe a little bit of a separation here, but this will be one long head of the lower portion of your abdominals. Now that'll bring us over here to our hip bone, and we talked a little bit about that. And that sort of gives us this landmark where our line should be that will kind of taper in to our groin area. This line will just this kind of V taper will come down into here. And then we have our leg muscles coming out from our hip bone and our glutes right along here. So that pretty much wraps up just this overview of the anatomy. And you can also see this little bump here. This is our spinal column, the C7. And that will you'll see that little bump a lot on models. If you look on models online, you'll see this little bump. That will kind of come out a little bit as well. So I think I'm going to include this. I'll include this reference in your model, in your project folder, for you to allow you to look at and take a look at and use as a reference as you're sculpting if you ever get stuck. So this will be a good way for you to sort of, go back and forth and take a look at, and it'll help you understand. And that's why I left in these brush strokes, to help you understand how the muscle fibers, they go and where they connect to. And that will help you as you start developing a little bit of your sculpts. So in the next lesson, we're going to start building out our base mesh. So then we can start sculpting in all of these muscles that I just talked about. I put a link in the description to download project files. You can also go to astronomic3d.com to download project files from this tutorial and all the tutorials that I've made so far. Thanks for watching.